See it played, the World War, Tannenberg introductory scenario. So really enjoying the game, but I left a note here. Note number 1 on my German defenders, I think. Yeah, they defended. I left a note there because I pretty sure I've been doing the combats wrong. Pretty significant. So talk about that in just a minute. So I chalk this up to the type of mistake that happens playing solo. I don't think this type of mistake would come up if two players are getting into the game together, reading the rules, bouncing their interpretations off each other. But solitaire, I missed something, I'm pretty sure. I say pretty sure because I'm not going to go back and look at the earlier videos. So this is what I realized. What I was doing for combats, like, and it's been days now. I don't remember very clearly, but I mean, I think a bunch of I guess the cavalry wasn't involved. Okay, so it was infantry. I think in maybe 3 hexes here, attack the Germans. Okay, basically, yeah, Russians. So what I was doing, because I'm playing solitaire, is I would just kind of roll for the Russians, and then I would roll for the Germans, and then I would go through and figure the results, and not being as strict in the steps as I should have been. Here's the difference. I was missing that after everything is done and I've taken losses, then I was figuring, yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was doing the attack, I was doing the counterattack, which is correct, and then I was doing implementing the results. But I was still doing it too quick. That's the right order, but I was still doing it too quick, because then I was determining whether there was a forced retreat. Because in this game, if the Russians lose... Okay, I wanted to make sure I got the operative words correctly. Yeah, at least. So in this game, if the Russians lose at least 1/3 of their strength involved, or the Germans lose at least 1/2 of their strength involved, they are forced to retreat. Of course, the little catch there is that the attackers, so then when the Russians attack and you determine the results, if the defenders are forced to retreat as a result of if they're forced to retreat, well, actually, or if they're voluntarily retreat, their strength is doubled, not tripled. So basically, they are counterattacking with less strength, in addition to their losses being cut by 1/3. I think it's 1/3. But I was having basically the defenders counterattacking before determining that they are in fact forced to retreat, in which case I have to implement a retreating counterattack no matter what. Okay, so that was not a very elegant explanation, but again, when I think about it, I really don't think this would come up in a 2-player game, because each player would be wanting to figure out everything from their perspective. So the attacker would probably want to figure out, hey, I've caused enough casualties to force you to retreat, so it's not a choice. So then the defender is right then and there implementing those effects for the counterattack. Okay. So we're in the August turn 6. Some German... So the Germans received 2 infantry units here, brigades, Landwehr infantry brigades on the west side of the map there. And now they are into their movement phase. So there are a few things that I still want to get to for demonstration purposes. One is rail movement. The other one is column attacks. This is the first turn in the Tannenberg introductory scenario game where rail movement is allowed. So the Germans have a rail capacity of 6 this turn. The Russians still don't have rail movement until two more turns. So rail movement, and I'm also going to be looking for an opportunity for a column attack. Okay, I'll just go through everything that I can figure out. What I can't figure out is I can't figure out if these reinforcements can arrive in their reinforcement hex here entrained. Probably just missing it somewhere, haven't found it yet. So I will not consider them entrained. Okay, so I've got 2 brigades here, the reinforcements. I want to get them up to Allenstein up here, and I'm going to use the network. Again, the single lines are double track rail lines, and the dashed lines are single track rail line. Right away, since the hex that they start in has double track and single track rail lines leaving that hex, so right away, if units that move on the single track rail line, the Germans are limited to 2 division or division equivalents per turn. I'm moving 2 here. If they followed the single track here, they would be the only 2 units that could follow this single track rail line this turn. But they can get to Allenstein going entirely by double track rail line here, so it doesn't matter. But I wanted to mention the limitations for the single track rail lines. So again, the Germans have a rail capacity this turn, and that's what's shown on the turn record track. The capacity is 6. Capacity is the number of divisions and division equivalents that can use rail movement on that country's rail network in a turn. I'm just going to move these 2, so I'm only using, these are division equivalents, I believe. It mentions regiments and headquarters. These, of course, are shown as brigades. I'll just continue to assume that we're talking about the same thing in game terms here. So these are basically each of these brigades moving along the rail here are going to each eat up one of the German rail capacity points for this turn. But I'm not going to get anywhere near the 6 total rail capacity for this turn. Okay, in this game in particular, in Tannenberg, players may only use rail lines within their respective countries. Here's the boundary between Germany and Russia. So Germans are only going to be moving by rail within Germany. Russians are only going to be moving by rail within Russia. The only, if I remember correctly, the only way to influence from one side to the other is when enemy units are in rail hexes in a player's home territory. I do believe they eliminate that hex of rail for use. They basically destroy it in this game. Anyways, I'll get to that if that comes up. Actually, the Germans have covered at least one. I'm looking one. No. The Germans have covered about a half a dozen rail hexes already. So I guess by side note or something, I would copy that down to make sure that, well, actually, now that I've gone this far, I'll figure out if they are destroyed. Yeah, okay, enemy ground units in rail hexes in enemy territory in this game destroy the rail capacity for the rest of the game. Okay. So, for example, I think, yeah, this is something that you'd want to record. I think the German units there followed that single track rail line, which should be in Russia. So that stretch of rail, I believe, would be inoperative for the rest of the game. Okay. All right, so let's talk about rail capacity, talk about single track, double track. Let's do in training. So we still use movement points. So the 1st Brigade, for example, here, 66th Landwehr Brigade Infantry in trains for 1 movement point. And then it's going to follow the double track rail line up here, and it's going to spend 1/10 of a movement point per hex. Following the rail line there, so 1/10, 2/10, 3, 4, 5/10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1. So gets up to Allenstein. It has spent 1 to entrain, 1 movement point to move up here. Fractions would be lost. So if they moved 1 more hex for 1/10 of a movement point and stopped and detrained, or actually if they just stopped, they would lose the remaining 9/10 of that movement point, but they stay in Allenstein. And okay, so it looks like it doesn't cost anything to detrain. So oh, but I guess you would, no, actually you would want to note that though, because units can stay entrained from one turn to the next, and if a unit were attacked while entrained, they would be forced to detrain and they would defend, but without any multiples. That could be devastating. So, okay, so even though it doesn't appear to cost anything to detrain, I will say that they detrain in Allenstein. So then the next Landwehr Brigade does the same thing. 1 to entrain, 10/10 or 1 movement point to move to Allenstein, and detrain. So that is rail movement, rail capacity. Yeah. Let's look at unit movement, ground movement, I guess, not rail movement. Down here, the German 3rd Reserve Infantry Division doesn't seem to be doing too much. I'm going to move him up, move him towards the front lines. One of these Landwehr brigades can, well, actually that force in the unassailable hex there, unassailable fortress, can defend the line there at the very least. Okay, so we have a regular German infantry division movement allowance of 5. So I'm going to move the unit here, and again I'm crossing a clear hex side, and then I'm going to go from 1213 to 1313, which again is clear hex side. Even though there's all this forest here, this is clear, this hex side. So that's 1, 2. Now they're going to move to 1412. This again is a clear hex side, even though you got all this broken terrain here. Doesn't matter. This side is clear. So That's 3, and then they're going to go to 1513, which again is another clear hex side for 4. And now, if they wanted to move to 1613, it's a clear hex side. It would be 5 for terrain, but they can't do that because they would be entering an enemy zone of control. Cavalry units and infantry units in this game exert zones of control. So that would be another one for a total of 6, which exceeds the movement allowance. You can use column movement to increase your movement allowance by 50%, but then you couldn't enter a zone of control, so you can't do that. So the German division is left there. Now, note that as the German infantry division moved there is no such thing that I've seen so far. I don't think in this game there isn't anything like a road bonus in the sense of either extra movement points or extra hexes of movement following rail lines or whatever. There's none of that. Remember that these single track and double track rail lines crossing hex sides, they can reduce the cost of some hex sides, which can be very important, but that again is not a quote unquote road bonus, as some other games might have. Okay. Oh, I was looking around. I wanted to do a column attack, and I will get to a column attack. I don't see a good example here because you're basically talking about the attacker's strength being halved. Well, you still pay supply normally. The attacker's strength is halved. The defender's strength is doubled, in addition to all the other modifications as normal. So you're going to be doing column attacks when you have very strong force against a relatively weaker force.